So
Yeah.
I feel internal pressure to make this work. I want to make it work better than it has worked. Every time we have some success, I feel like that just makes me want to figure out a way to have more success. And it bothers me whenever we take a step back. But that's an internal pressure. There's no external pressure that, oh my God, John Krasinski's not going to be able to feed his family on Sunday night if you don't get this thing working. And it is a second job. And I could, if I wanted to be really honest, at times it feels more like a hobby than a job. So I want to make it work, but I'm lucky that I have a great A job.
Right. Well, and you've made it clear to me what the expectation was for the fan show from day one, and to your credit, it's been a completely pressure-less situation for me. Now, granted, I'm not Tim Yoder or John Krasinski, but I don't think my show tries to be what theirs is either.
No, and what would be the point if it did? You give us a different voice and a different perspective, which is what we need. And hopefully at some point the whole network will prosper and your show will benefit as well.
Sure. Right. Well, the savings, what I'm saving and not having to go to a shrink to deal with my fanship is recompense alone. All right. So that's it. What's the on the last question for me on the network itself? What's next for the network there? What are you looking forward to? That's sort of, I don't want you to scoop yourself here, but what do you want to take the network next?
Well, we started off with some shows that did really well immediately. It led me to be optimistic and try it out. We've tried out a bunch of shows. Some of them really just didn't catch on. I feel like every show we invested time in ended up being a good show. Some of them just didn't, land sponsors or just make sense to continue. And so we're talking. I have to be vague for the moment. We're talking to somebody who's a big name in Minnesota who I think wants to do a podcast with us. He's also aligned with a business that might, take care of some of the kind of help bolster some of our weaknesses in terms of running a business. Yeah. So we might go down that road here. I've got a couple of weeks here of meetings where I hope we're going to make something happen. I'm fairly optimistic this is going to be a good year in a lot of ways. I guess what I've learned is, sadly, just doing a good show isn't enough. Mm-hmm. If you do a good show and you can't sell it, if you can't make it worth everybody's while, well, it's just not worth a lot in today's marketplace because it's so easy for anybody to do a show.
Right. Yeah. Well, that'll be exciting. I'll look forward to hopefully that coming to fruition and learning about it as it does. So let's switch over to the fan aspect of the fan show and get your expert opinion on a couple of questions that are always interesting to me and I hope to people listening to the show as well, obviously. But so I spent a lot as a fan, certainly of Minnesota teams. I spent a lot of time grousing about different things, and mostly around the topic of being disappointed by one thing or another, which leads me to wonder from your perspective, sort of bridging that gap as a professional. How would you quantify what's the contract between fan and team?
It's a great question, and it's one where I have to check myself occasionally because I have had both lives. I grew up as a complete diehard who, I was a cliche. I listened to the radio under the sheets at night on the West Coast games, stayed up well past where I should have. I lost sleep when my teams lost sleep. I lived and died with every pitch. I went to the games. I spent all my money on gloves and jerseys and everything. I did all of that. And, somewhere in my mid-20s, probably late 20s, when I started covering professional sports, but for myself, seeing things behind the scenes, I still loved a lot of it, but I lost the fan aspect. I just didn't look through that prism anymore. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I have to remind myself that I was a fan and that it's a weird, difficult, emotional existence, and that I should always have some empathy for that,
Mm. So, I guess, what's a reasonable expectation for what a fan should expect.
I mean, it's got to go. It's really up to the fan, though, isn't it? I mean, it's really not up to me. It's up to the fan. If you want to believe that your team owes you a championship, well, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of frustration. But can I say that that's not right? It's what you want. It's like telling a kid what It's like telling a kid what they should want for Christmas. I can tell them what they aren't. I can tell them what they're not going to get for Christmas. That doesn't mean they're not going to ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing about sports is miracles do happen. I mean, the 1987 Twins should not have won the World Series. That was not a good team. They won 85 games in the regular season. They lucked out by playing in a bad division, and then once they got to the postseason, all their flaws became strengths. They had a shallow pitching staff. You didn't need anything more than a shallow pitching staff, Mm-hmm. They had a really good lineup that had failed before in the clutch, and they all clicked it. I mean, so how can anybody ever tell somebody that you're actually not going to win a championship? You might win a championship.
Yeah, and to me, again, as strictly the fan, it's not I want championships, period. It's that I want championships, but I know I'm going to be back again next year. Not getting the championship in a given season. I know I'm not going to just say forget it. I'm done being a fan of this team, right? So to me, it's about an expectation, but that if a team in a given season doesn't reach that expectation, then you just come back and try again next year. I mean, so having grown up in Minnesota and then now living on the East Coast and watching New York team fans, if the Yankees don't win the World Series, it's a complete failure. But they're back on opening day the next year, completely behind their team, right? I mean, that's my perspective on the expectation part of it. So I guess what's the lowest common denominator, though? Can a fan expect effort?
Yeah, I guess that would be my simplest answer, is that I think if I got out of the business and became a pure fan again, and it's probably related to the way I look at things as a sports writer too, which is I think you can expect effort and you should expect intelligence. Now, you can have an intelligent front office and a team full of people who give you a lot of effort, and you can finish ninth. It's not. Yeah. It's not an automatic that if you have certain qualities, you're going to get a certain result. But this is interesting too. I was having a conversation. I think it was Peter Gasperlin on Twitter, and I wrote about the Timberwolves the other day. I said, listen, the owner hasn't won anything in 15 years. They don't have a general manager. They don't really have a coach. And one of their two max contract players doesn't make an effort, and they have a bunch of bad contracts. And even though they have a great young player in Karl-Anthony Towns, they aren't winning anything. So there's not a lot of hope there. It doesn't mean something good won't happen, but there's nothing to look at in that situation. Say this is promising. It's not promising. It's a mess. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. Not only do I not know how they get out of it, I don't know who can get them out of it. Now, so I wrote that, and Peter tweeted me, okay, well, the Twins have been a mess. Which team's in worse shape? And I said, well, the Twins have been a mess, and they haven't won anything since 2010. They've gone to the playoffs 2010. And I can't tell you they're going to win this year, but you want to go to intelligence and effort. I know that the owner is stable. Mm-hmm. I know that the general manager is very intelligent and is building, kind of an amazing behind-the-scenes team. And, all you have to do is have a conversation with him, and you go, okay, I learned something. This guy is smart. Mm-hmm. And they do have young talent. They have a farm system that's rated fourth best in baseball. And so I can't tell you, they're going to make the playoffs this year or next year. I can't tell you that Sano and Buxton are going to finally break through. And I can't tell you that 5 years from now we won't be sitting here saying, man, Falvey wasn't good enough. They had to start over, and now they're one of the worst franchises in baseball. But I see effort and I see intelligence, so I'm not going to put them in the same bucket as the Timberwolves. Yeah.
Yep. That's fair. I totally understand that, and it's difficult sometimes as a fan to cut through the emotional moment and the emotion of the moment and remember that. But your front office and ownership have to set you up for success, and your players have to try hard and be professional, and that doesn't guarantee wins. But I think that is the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, and when it comes to championships or sometimes even long-term success, sometimes it's luck. I mean, I still look at the Twins, and they were kind of a model franchise for a team that didn't win playoff series. They were still kind of a model franchise for doing the most they could with their situation, up through 2009 or whatever. And Mauer was a no doubt Hall of Famer. Morneau was starting to put himself in that conversation. And then all of a sudden, Morneau gets kneed in the head and is never the same. And Mauer wakes up one day with some weird ailment, and he was never the same. And all of a sudden, they have this terrible decade. Well, I don't know where they would have ended up if both those guys stayed healthy, but it would have been better than what it was, and there wasn't much they could do about that.
Right.
Krasinski made a big point on our last podcast saying, yes, the Wolves have all kinds of problems. Part of it is because Flip died. And that's not an excuse for everything that follows. But it is something it is a factor. You cannot ignore the fact that sometimes bad luck happens or tragedy happens, and all these things can affect the way a franchise operates.
Sage stuff, and a good reset, I think. Certainly on this show, where we tend to let the wires burn, sort of buzz live for a while on certain topics. So I appreciate that. All right. So last thing, and we'll let you get back to your evening here. But Twins, Wild, Vikes, Wolves, each of their teams prior season, they made the playoffs. It very well could be that this iteration of each of their seasons, none of them makes the playoffs. Which of them do you think, though, is in the best shape in general? And I'm not going to say towards contention or anything like that, but in the best shape in general for the next season.
I still think the Vikings. It was a bad season, but they have a lot of good players. They have a lot of good players. Zimmer, whatever his flaws, is still a very good defensive coach. I was really disappointed with the way they played in the last game or two, but he still knows what he's doing. He didn't become stupid overnight. I think they've added some really veteran coaches who, if not, they're not better than the previous coaches, probably fit with Zimmer better, which I think is important right now. And, God, once again, they have a lot of really good players. They have a lot of players that everybody would love to have. So if Zimmer kind of gets his head right and they get a little luck and Cousins settles down, you can see paths to them making some kind of a playoff run. Twins still might be a ways away. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they won 90, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they had another bad season. There's nothing guaranteed there. It's still completely dependent on Sano and Buxton. That's still a scary thing. Wild, I think they're exactly what you see. They are, in a 16-team conference, they're 7th or 8th best team. That's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not exciting. And the Timberwolves are just, again, a dumpster fire.
Yeah, interesting. And I got to admit, it doesn't. I don't feel as anxious given that accounting of the four majors as I probably would should and B would have in years past. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if I'm finally the savvy veteran or if that describes a sort of more or less a fair approach than I should.
Or maybe just beaten down.
Yeah, well, maybe we should all just become Lynx fans.
Well, here's the thing: the Lynx are never going to be the same. I mean, They won 4 out of 7 titles. They could have won a 5th very easily, and great players, great people, and what they built was really special. And then Maya Moore decides not to play. I mean, whether that's luck or fate or whatever. I mean, now so they lose Lindsey Whalen and Maya Moore in the same season.
Right.
And listen, Sylvia Fowles is a great player, and I think Reeve is a great coach. But it's not going to be the same. They're not going to be contending for championships. They're going to be trying to be a playoff team. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the Lynx fan base responds because
that, yeah.
they